specifically avoid women who remind me of you, Mom." Those 10 words, spoken over a lukewarm cup of coffee on a quiet Thursday afternoon, didn't just break the silence, they shattered the foundation of everything I thought I had built as a parent. My son Leo sat across from me in the kitchen, home for spring break and looking at me with a gaze that wasn't filled with the admiration I expected, but with a weary, cautious kind of pity. I am 43 years old, and I have spent every waking second of my adult life being a catalyst for change, a voice for the voiceless, and a relentless educator of the unaware. I raised Leo to be a different kind of man, a conscious, empathetic, deconstructed man who understood his privilege and navigated the world with a critical eye. I thought we were close because we talked about things that mattered. I thought I'd given him a roadmap to a better life, but as he sat there, he told me that his roadmap was actually a minefield. The women I date, the woman I'm seeing now, Sarah, they're nothing like you, he said, his voice maddeningly calm, a tone he'd perfected since he was 14 to keep my intensity at bay. I tried to laugh it off, mentioning the age gap, but he didn't blink, telling me directly that he avoids women who share my views, my way of seeing the world, and especially my way of communicating. It felt like a physical blow, a literal slap across the face that left me breathless while coffee spilled onto the table. I asked him what the hell that meant, my heart pounding with a mix of indignation and fear. And he told me simply that he wasn't interested in dating activists or women who see every single interaction through a political lens. I felt my jaw clenching, the familiar heat of a teaching moment rising in my chest as I asked if he meant he didn't like women with principles or women who cared about equality. He sighed that specific, heavy sigh I've heard 1,000 times and pointed out that I was doing it again, translating his personal feelings into the worst possible political interpretation. I've spent my life in the trenches of community organizing, writing op-eds, testifying at city council meetings, and running workshops on power dynamics, ensuring our home was a sanctuary for meaningful conversation. I never shied away from calling out problematic behavior, especially in family, because I believed that was where the work truly began. I raised him to be better than the men who had hurt me, yet here he was, telling me that being around me was exhausting. He brought up a memory from 6th grade, a time he came home excited about scoring 3 goals in soccer tryouts, and instead of a great job, I gave him a 20-minute lecture on how team sports reinforce hierarchical masculine dominant structures. I argued that I was helping him think critically, but he looked at me and said, "I was 11, Mom, and I just wanted you to be proud of me." The hits kept coming, the video games I turned into lessons on violence, the 8th grade crush I turned into a seminar on the male gaze, even the time he had mono in high school. When he told me he was tired back then, I apparently told him he was experiencing the weight of privilege and needed to sit with that discomfort. He looked me in the eye and reminded me that he actually just had a viral infection and needed a doctor, not a lecture on societal comfort. I felt cornered, my defensive walls rising like a fortress as I asked if I was supposed to apologize for raising him with a consciousness. He just shook his head, noting that I can't hear a single piece of personal criticism without framing it as an attack on my entire worldview. I told him I could take criticism. I've facilitated restorative justice circles. For heaven's sake, but he just sadly noted that I was simply waiting for him to finish so I could explain why he was wrong. We sat in a silence so thick it felt like it was choking me, while outside I could hear neighbors laughing. People I used to be friends with before I educated them into silence. I tried to reset, asking about this girl Sarah, hoping to find some common ground, but even my curiosity felt like an interrogation to him. He described Sarah as kind, someone who laughs a lot and doesn't search for hidden, problematic meanings in every sentence he utters. When I asked, with a sting in my voice, what she thought about the state of the world, he told me she thinks about it like a normal person. She cares, but she doesn't weaponize that caring. I bristled at the word weaponize, insisting I've only ever fought for equity, but he leaned forward and told me that was exactly the problem. Everything with me is a fight, and every conversation is a battle to be won. He reminded me of the time he mentioned business school and I sent him 15 articles on capitalist exploitation. And when I asked if he read them, he laughed and said he only skimmed them so he could pass the inevitable quiz I'd give him. He told me he'd been managing me since he was 14, carefully phrasing things to avoid triggering a lecture, which felt like a total betrayal of the open space I thought I'd created. I realized then that I hadn't created a space for honesty. I had created a space where he could either agree with me or prepare for a relentless educational onslaught until he gave up. He told me Sarah sees him as an individual, not a representative of a patriarchal system, a concept I immediately tried to deconstruct until he cut me off. He said I'd been trying to rebuild him since he could talk, making him feel that his very maleness was something he had to apologize for and perform against. I protested, saying I never said being male was bad. But he pointed out it was in every comment I made about men who disappointed me, in every conversation I had with my activist friends. I was sharing my reality, my pain, but he saw it as a curriculum where he was the problem student, tasked with redeeming an entire gender to make up for the men who hurt his mother. He told me that being around me felt like walking through a minefield, where one unreconstructed thought would lead to a boom of educational moments. I started to cry, finally admitting that I just wanted him to be better than the men who hurt me, and he softly replied, I know, and that's a lot to put on a kid. The conversation took a darker turn when he mentioned his father, my ex-husband, whom I've always described as someone who couldn't handle an equal partnership. Leo looked at me and said he remembered things differently. He remembered me correcting his father constantly, questioning every word until the man simply stopped speaking. He told me he understood why his father left, a statement that made the floor feel like it was dropping away from beneath my feet. Leo told me he was thinking about proposing to Sarah, and despite my immediate reflex to tell him he was too young and didn't know himself, he told me he knew he wanted a different life than the one I have. He called my life righteous but asked if it actually made me happy, a question that caught me completely off guard. I thought about my days filled with online arguments, planning sessions, and educational moments at the grocery store, and I realized I had very few friends left and no peace. My last relationship ended 3 years ago because he said I was exhausting, a word I dismissed as his fragility at the time, but now, hearing it from my son, it felt like a final verdict. Leo told me about Sarah's mother, who sends care packages and bakes cookies and just hangs out without interrogating anyone's choices. I felt sick, realizing I had offered my son substance and consciousness when he really just wanted a mother who saw him as a person instead of a political project. I admitted, for the first time in my life, that I didn't know how to be different, and he scoffed, saying he wasn't asking me to change everything just to be his mom sometimes. He gave me a choice. I could choose to be right, or I could choose to be connected, but I couldn't be both anymore. I looked around my kitchen, covered in protest posters and books on systems, and saw the loneliness of my own making, the cost of a life where being correct was more important than being kind. I finally whispered, I'm sorry, words that felt heavy and foreign, apologizing for turning his childhood into an activism seminar and measuring our love by his level of consciousness. We both sat there crying, a raw and ugly release of years of tension, before he came around the table and gave me a real hug. Not a polite greeting, but a desperate hold. He told me I still had time to learn how to be a mother without an agenda, and for the first time, I listened to him talk about Sarah without analyzing her for red flags. I listened to him talk about how she hums when she concentrates, and I forced myself to stay silent, to just let him be happy without weighing that happiness against the struggles of the world. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, sitting there and not teaching. But I saw his face light up in a way it never does when we discuss policy. I promised him I would try to be just his mom when I met her, even though the thought of turning off my vigilance felt like taking off a suit of armor I'd worn for 20 years. After he went upstairs to call her, I sat in the dark kitchen and scrolled through my social media. Seeing the exhausting person, he described the woman who would rather be right than loved. I realized that my activism had become a shield against intimacy, a way to keep people at arm's length while claiming the moral high ground. I had spent so long trying to fix the world that I had broken the most important relationship in my life, and the rightness of my cause didn't make the house feel any less empty. Tomorrow, I will try again to be just a mother, to offer love without a lesson plan, and to accept that I don't have all the answers. I don't know if I can truly change, but as I sat there in the quiet, I knew that being right was a cold comfort compared to the weight of my son's hand in mine. I have been so lonely in my righteousness, and it's finally time to put the weapons down and just be a person, before there's no one left to fight for.
If this confession kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We share powerful true stories every day that explore the complex realities of life.